do the keyboard
There we
shortcut.
go.
All right, very good. All right, well, hello and welcome to the 2024 Open Texas Conference. The Open Texas Conference is sponsored and convened by two cooperating organizations. We have the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, which is the state agency that serves as a resource partner and advocate for Texas higher education, and the Texas Digital Library, a consortium providing services that enable free and open access to scholarly, cultural heritage, and educational materials. My name is Ken Carrivo. I forgot to advance my thing here. There we go. My name is Ken Carrivo, and I'm a STEM librarian at Baylor University, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. We welcome you to introduce yourself and ask questions in chat. Please feel free to turn on your webcam, but we ask you mute your mic unless you're speaking. Also, please be aware that we are recording the session today. Recorded sessions will be available within the conference attendee hub for 30 days. Following the 30 days, the recordings will then be accessible through the Open Texas YouTube repository. I will be putting a link to that in the chat box shortly. And I will also place a link to the conference code of conduct in chat for your information. And I'm going to stop sharing. And pull my script back up. This session is titled Navigating Digital Accessibility Compliance, Lessons from UT Austin's Journey. We thank you all for joining us today, and I'll now turn it over to our session presenter, Dr. Jeff Freels, so we can get started. Jeff, it's all over to you.
Super. Thanks so much, Ken. And thanks everybody for coming today. Um, I'm assuming a lot of y'all are here. You are aware of newly published updated regulations, ADA regulations that were published by the U.S. Department of Justice in April of this year. UT Austin has had some prior insight to those regulations, and I'm going to talk about what we've been doing at UT Austin prior to the publication of those new regs and how we are seeking to meet them now that we're aware of them. And I'll get into all of that here in a second, but first a little bit about me. Again, my name is Jeff Freels. I'm Director of Assessment, Research, and Evaluation in the Provost's office at UT Austin. I am our SACS accreditation liaison. I am also in charge of various other things related to research and data at the university. You might say, well, Jeff, what the heck does that have to do with digital accessibility? And it doesn't much, except for the fact that before I came to UT, I spent 10 years as a community college history professor who taught online quite a bit and became really interested in accessibility because I believed then and I believe now that accessible learning experiences benefit all students and not just ones who are um, students who have disabilities. And so I think it's a way to raise all boats and increase access to education for everyone. And because of my position at the university in accreditation and assessment and my passion for this, I used my connections and skills to convince the provost's office to devote some greater resources and attention to digital accessibility a few years ago. And that is one of the things that really kicked off our journey here. And I've been involved in some central things at UT Austin that are really fundamental to how we're moving forward in this space. So that's what I'm here to talk about today, how we're moving forward on compliance with all of this. If you have questions, you can pop them in the chat. I'll try to keep up, but I did try to save room at the end for questions as well. So a little bit of background on how we got here. So prior to 2021 or so, digital accessibility at UT Austin, there was a big effort back in the late 2000s and early 2010s around video captioning, and a video captioning team was put in place. And back in 2013, it was created in the UT Austin libraries, and it was there until just this year. Also, prior U.S. Department of Justice audits had really focused a lot of scrutiny on websites. In the last audit, I can't remember exactly what year it was. I want to say it was 2015 or 2016, really focused on websites, and that led to a lot more attention at UT Austin around websites and, keeping up with accessibility of websites since then, although that work is very distributed. And I'll talk about how that's been a little bit problematic here in a minute. But around 2021, through my various contacts around the state, began to hear rumors that the Department of Justice was increasing expectations related to the accessibility of learning materials specifically, but potentially other things. Did a little bit of research and found out that some institutions around the country had been audited, and even some consent decrees had been issued or agreed to between institutions and the Department of Justice. Used that evidence, took it to our provost office and said, look, y'all, we're UT Austin. They're going to be looking at us. We need to get something moving here, or we are at a compliance risk. And I said very specifically what I think we should do for learning materials accessibility, because that was my primary concern at the time, was adopt the Ally tool. And I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. That is from a product from Anthology that integrates with your learning management system and gives you the ability to identify and potentially remediate inaccessible learning materials. Also, around that same time, a little bit after that, UT Austin adopted a new tool for websites. It's called Moncito. I don't use Moncito directly. I have gone in there and poked around in it. It provides accessibility scanning for websites, and it provides a path for remediation of those areas. So in 2022, leading to those efforts, the Provost's office, along with IT services, put together a university-wide committee on learning materials accessibility. We researched various options and landed on adopting Anthology Ally in spring of 2023. We did that, and then later that summer, we found out that the university was already under audit by the Department of Justice. And so our timing on all of this was actually pretty outstanding. But that's part of what I'm going to talk about today, because it was really clear in those initial conversations with the Department of Justice auditors what was coming in the April 2024 regulations. We didn't know they were going to come out in 2024 at that point, but they all started asking questions about the things that were going to be reflected in those regulations. So we were a bit ahead of the curve in understanding what the new expectations were. And so that's really why I'm put this presentation together to talk about this, because we got an inside look and we have tailored our efforts to meet those expectations. So just to summarize very briefly what we've gotten from the auditors so far, and by the way, they haven't even finished our audit. They started it in spring of 23. They have not. They started with websites, and when they came to us in August, they wanted access to password protected areas, including our learning management system and applications that students use primarily for registration, enrollment, things of that nature. So the auditors have gotten access to all these different systems. We're still waiting on to hear what they're going to tell us. They seem to have very positive feelings towards the steps we had taken in learning materials accessibility. As I said, that's a quote in that first meeting. They said adopting the Ally tool was a good first step, but that by itself was not going to be enough. About what they said about websites, our people who work on websites were not surprised. It was basically just an increased expectation around updated WCAG standards for accessibility. The one that is going to be the most problematic, and is the most problematic for UT, and I suspect for a lot of other institutions, are applications that you have behind some sort of password wall that students will be using. Because I don't know about your institutions. At UT Austin, we have enrollment and registration systems that were constructed, so in some cases in the 80s and 90s. They were not designed for accessibility because no one was asking about these things back then. And so it's been a particular challenge to figure out what we're going to do in that area. So that was really clear. It was in August of 2024 that we had a series of meetings with the Department of Justice auditors, and these were sort of the high level takeaways we took from that. So what happened as a result of that, and by the way, this slide encapsulates work that we did prior to finding out we were under audit, which was mostly focused on learning materials accessibility. And this also does summarize some of the work we did after that, because basically our university compliance services, which is our chief compliance office, after we found out the DOJ was auditing the university, they asked us to basically continue our work, but to expand it to encapsulate websites and applications, especially that students use. So we embarked over in 2023-24 and, or excuse me, 2022-23 and 23-24 on this pretty systematic effort to understand the landscape of digital accessibility around campus at UT Austin. So that started with faculty and staff interviews, particularly around the use of Ally, because if you know anything about how Ally works within your learning management system, where there are documents that are posted in the LMS, it will put a little icon next to it, and they are color coded. And if you have inaccessible materials in that learning management system course site, it puts a red icon there. And that was disconcerting to a lot of faculty members. They see those red icons, and in some cases, they see a lot of them, and they get very overwhelmed with what that means. In fact, I've even heard at other universities where professors have insisted that they turn Ally off in certain course sites because they just don't like to see those icons. We have not done that, and I would not encourage that, but I have heard of that type of thing. It also comports with the research we did, where we had a graduate student working with us who did interviews of faculty members who were involved in an early pilot for using Ally, and they were the ones who told us these things. And so we modeled our approach to rolling out the application based on the research that we did there. We also talked to staff who handle issues related to accessibility in our colleges and schools, in our disability and access office, in the libraries, various places where they deal with accessibility of documents, websites, all that type of thing. We collected data from the Ally system once it was deployed within our LMS, and also Monsito, which is the website scanning tool, excuse me. And then a comparative analysis of current policy in light of the new ADA changes, which again, we knew were coming. I'm trying to pull up because I'm having trouble. Give me 1 second here. I can't find my document. I have a link to what I did was, it was actually a really great use of AI. I actually went and got the digital accessibility policies from Harvard, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and University of Reading, which is in the UK. And God love the Brits. They are a little bit ahead of us as when it pertains to these things. And so the reason I used the University of Reading digital accessibility policy, even though it's not in the US, is because it's very forward thinking around accessibility. And I had the link and I can't seem to get my notepad document. There it is. So if you want to check out this AI analysis, so basically what I did was I plugged in, actually loaded, there's the chat. You can go check it out. So I loaded in those attachments, the digital accessibility policies from those places, and said, where are their commonalities? Where are their differences? And what kind of approaches do they embody for digital accessibility? And then I took our UT Austin's public facing policies on our electronic information resources, and one other policy, and those are public facing. So I wasn't super worried about using AI for that, and said, read these and tell me how they need to be updated to reflect the more up-to-date policies that are at Harvard and these places. And it actually did a really great job at summarizing these things for our committee. And so I was able to put that AI analysis together, send it to our committee, and get the committee up to speed much more quickly on the gaps of policy that we were experiencing at UT Austin. So that's a pretty cool use of AI, I thought, and kind of right up its right down its lane. Does really well for that. So takeaways from all this research we did: support for accessibility is really fragmented. For example, the only campus-wide resource for accessibility amongst developers, software and application developers, is a Slack channel where they can go ask questions. There's no community of practice, there's no committee, there's no anything that are going on in any way to help people, or even for websites where there are web managers that work around the university. There's not really any sort of community or support mechanism or central resources for helping those folks understand how they can make websites more accessible. And for learning materials accessibility before Ally and before some things that we've created, it was the same. There was really no support for that, and there was no coordination. Worse, I think in some cases, is that many developers told us on the survey that they just didn't have time for digital accessibility. I'll go into this a little bit more on the next page, but even where they were interested in it and they wanted to do more for digital accessibility, they just didn't have the space um, um, uh, to do that. Testing and training are close to non-existent. There was really nothing in place around learning materials accessibility before we started with Ally. The only stuff related to websites were there was some basic resources available for web managers in order to use the Moncito application and to identify and fix problems in their websites. There's no usability testing that was ever taking place in any context, and especially around our mobile applications and any applications that are student facing of any kind, no testing whatsoever. In fact, we were, when the Department of Justice auditors came to us and they said, we want passwords to get into your systems to check your applications, it was just like, well, we kind of had to, we obviously had to give them that access, but we knew as well that when they get in there, they were going to find systems that were just not designed for accessibility because they're old. And that's really a significant problem in this area. Existing policies are out of date because they don't reflect the increased scrutiny from the Department of Justice. They're not really reflecting the new state of play, especially around things like procurement. That's a big problem I'm hearing consistently around the country about these new regulations, is that it's been really easy for vendors to get exceptions to accessibility policies prior to now. And now more and more institutions and systems and state level coordinating boards are having more conversations about how more pressure can be brought to bear on vendors for making their tools and software more accessible, and publishers for that matter. I know this is an open Texas conference. We've had issues with some publishers who tell us they can't even fix documents that they're providing to us. And that's been a little bit challenging dealing with that. And so there's just a lot of things within the infrastructure of accessibility that need to be updated. And finally, accessibility expertise is specialized and scarce. There just aren't a lot of people who have a lot of skills in this area. There are some obviously who have developed it on their own. And by the way, I'm spoiler alert for what's to come, because accessibility expertise is specialized and scarce. That means it's going to be hard to get and it's going to be expensive, but we'll get to that here in a second. A little more detailed. So key considerations, and I previewed this when we talked to our faculty, and it's also something we've seen in other areas as well. Accessibility can be really overwhelming. To tell you a quick story, I teach at UT Austin, and when we first turned on Ally, Ally gives you a course accessibility score from 0 to 100%. 100% would be perfectly accessible and a 0% would be perfectly inaccessible. The score in my course, and I believe in this stuff, as you recall, it was 39%, which is not great. And so I was sweating that a lot. And I've spent now, and this was early in spring 23. I teach every spring. And so basically by the time we got to the middle of the spring 24 semester, I had managed to get my course accessibility score to 94%. That took, for me, about 20 to 25 hours of work on fixing documents in my class to get them backloaded to Canvas and in an accessible format. So it's a lot. And for a lot of faculty said, like, they're literally seeing red when they see those Ally icons in their LMS. It is really overwhelming. And that's one thing I see this in the chat, and this is something we've really emphasized at UT, which is you don't have to fix everything at once. It's really okay to work on one thing at a time. And we emphasize this in other areas. And, I work a lot with our Center for Teaching and Learning and Academic Affairs around learning design, learning outcomes, things of that nature. And we really try to emphasize you don't have to fix this stuff at once. I'm really committed to this. And it took a little over a year and 20 to 25 hours of work to get my class to 94%. And I don't think I can get it any higher, to be perfectly honest with you, because there's just some documents that I just can't fix. For various reasons, because, for example, they come from a publisher who can't fix it for us, but that's another matter. So we really try to emphasize to folks, this is about education and awareness and helping people understand that it's a journey. Accessibility is not something you're going to go from 0 to 100 in a day. It's going to take more time. And by the way, I'm also a compliance officer at the university. We emphasize that we're not bringing the hammer of compliance, at least yet. Maybe we will down the line, but we've also emphasized that it's okay. That said, people are generally pretty open to it. Obviously, there are going to be resistors and people who are less open to accessibility, but for the most part, people are really welcoming and want to do the right thing in this regard. They get it and they just aren't quite sure how. And so in a lot of cases, we found people are really warm and welcoming to it, and they just need a little bit of help to help them start the process of getting their learning materials or websites or whatever up to speed a little bit better. But you note here, and I raised time in the in red here, and it's a high contrast color, so it's accessible. Faculty, website coordinators, and developers don't have time or expertise to focus effectively on accessibility. This was a big one for web managers and application developers and software developers because, frankly, they're really super busy, and accessibility takes work, and they're not experts in it. And so a lot of times this work gets deprioritized. And I remember talking to a developer about this is Jeff, I want to make this stuff more accessible, but I've got this laundry list of things to do that are super high priority. And I've got people looking over my shoulders to do this stuff. And it's really challenging. And and one of the things they told us is they need space and time in their work. It's not just expertise. They need time to be able to devote to making things more accessible. And so far, they haven't had it. This stuff's expensive and it's getting more expensive. These kinds of conversations are taking place all over the country right now. I wish I was a software developer with a lot of accessibility expertise right now because I think there's a lot of jobs coming open for this stuff. And so getting those people are going to be really challenging. And also, by the way, the costs of this technology I know are not low. Um, People tend to think UT Austin has just these unlimited pots of money. And generally, I'll admit the university has more resources than a lot of places, but the money all goes to lots of different places. And getting money out of our executives for things that aren't super glamorous or high profile can be really challenging. And so we still do have to try to make things work in a sustainable way, given all these restrictions. And then, of course, policies, especially on digital accessibility generally, but procurement are really out of date. And we have no standards whatsoever for accessibility in applications. And so these are the types of things that need to be developed. So this is kind of the big takeaways we took from our assessment of the landscape at UT Austin. One of the things we did, and I'm sorry, this is research university centric. If you're not a research university out there, I do think it can apply to any kind of institution, and I'll explain why here in a second. But when we primarily talked to two folks, and these were basically who various people that work in accessibility told us were leaders in this space. So we talked to the technology. I can't remember what TILO stands for, but you can go look them up. They have a big team that deals with learning technology at Virginia Tech. But the one that we really were attracted to and we are attempting to emulate the most at UT Austin is from Cal State University, Chico. Their technology, equity, inclusivity, and I think they just threw in the N, so it's and they call it 10 when they're there. This model they developed going back to 2010, 2011 at Cal State Chico. I think it was Chico State at the time before it was fully integrated in the Cal State system. Don't quote me on that. But it was so successful at Cal State Chico that they rolled it out to every other Cal State University campus. Actually, the Cal State University sponsored Chico to go around and do this everywhere. And so they've adopted this model across the Cal State system, and even some University of California institutions have adopted the Cal State Chico model. If you know anything about the politics of higher ed in California, you know it's a little bit surprising to hear that University of California campuses are copying Cal State campuses, but they did in this case because the Cal State people are really wizards at this stuff. They're probably the best. So they have a model that's been adopted all over the place. It centralizes accessibility services in one spot and provides these services gratis to all campus entities. And that's websites, applications, although that's more consultative because they're not developers. But learning materials, accessibility, captioning, all of that type of stuff are centralized. And as you can see here, they've reached a steady state, according to the folks we talked to there. Um, um, so they have some experience at this and they've kind of figured it out. But you can see from the numbers here, and in 2023, the numbers they gave to us, their ally license, one full-time FTE staff member, and then 15 to 20 part-time students, and they work 10 to 15 hours a week. Their supervisor students work 15 to 20. It just depends. And they get them on work study so that they save money. Their total budget for all of this is $130K per year, which is very reasonable when you're considering the fact they're handling websites, they're handling video captioning, they're handling learning materials accessibility. They can take a learning management system course that is inaccessible, and their team can make it close to 100% accessible in 2 weeks. That's how their model essentially works. It's impressive. And so this is what we've been trying to institute at UT Austin. And the reason they did this are really important. And I think this is a big one because accessibility is complex work. They talked about years ago, are we going to train everybody to do this? Or is there some other way? And look, I'll give you an example. So at UT Austin, we were talking about how we were going to do this. It's like, should we get everybody at the university an Adobe Acrobat license? I don't know if y'all know anything about how much an Adobe Acrobat license costs, but if we were to get Adobe Acrobat licenses for 3,000 faculty members, for example, that would be extremely cost prohibitive. At the same time, if we just got Adobe licenses for a team that's going to remediate inaccessible learning materials, that would be so much easier. And that's what they do at Cal State. So instead of trying to provide everybody with Adobe, they actually just put the licenses in one place and then have the students that work in that team do it for them. Faculty love it because they get to have their stuff fixed and sent back to them, and they don't have to worry about it. It's off their plate, which is a huge deal for us as well. If we can eliminate faculty labor, but still enable them to make their courses and learning materials more accessible, it's a giant win for us. And so this work is so complicated, and they have these elaborate workflows that they use at Chico. It's just easier to train students to do it. And it's also, by the way, y'all, it's very tedious work. So it's just so much easier to train students to do it and get them, and it's so much more efficient, and it saves everyone time and energy. It would be difficult to quantify the amount of faculty labor that they save there, but it's considerable. And so for us, we're a research university. Saving faculty time is a huge value for us. And so that was a really big one. And more importantly, by doing it this way, instead of waiting on everybody to get trained and then waiting on them to have time to fix inaccessible learning materials, by doing it this way, you actually put this SWAT team together of sorts that can fix things. You send them to them, and they can return them in no time flat in many cases. And so you're going to get more rapid improvements in accessibility at fewer financial and time costs. And like I said, faculty particularly benefit by this. The last one is one I didn't quite expect, but has been really awesome to find. Students with disabilities love getting involved in this work. When we did research on rolling out Ally to our campus, we had a whole team of students with disabilities who were helping us do the rollout, put together resources for it, do research on faculty perceptions of it. We coordinated with our National Disability Center for Student Success, who also has faculty and students that work with it. And these people are really fired up about accessibility. They're really into it. And this is really their passion and for this work and their creativity around it. And because they understand inaccessibility and accessibility so much, it actually is, it's just a different kind of people who get involved in this work. And they're really passionate about it. And at 10 at Cal State Chico, they said a lot of times they will sign up students in their first year and they stay with the office for 4 years. And a lot of them rise to become supervisors of other students. And it's a really sustainable model for them because the students become really attracted to the work. And the same thing has happened here with us, where we've been able to leverage people who do have expertise and get them into positions and roles that are going to enable them to perform this work. So I think if you find communities or people at your campuses, students with disabilities, and you can employ them in doing work to make the learning environment more accessible and make websites and videos more accessible, they're really passionate about it. And it's really a joy to work with those kinds of students. So I think that's kind of an important secondary benefit to this is that you get to work with great people and people with disabilities who really want to make this stuff work. It's really awesome. All right, so how have we been progressing in these areas since all of this happened? Well, the most important thing is we created a digital accessibility center in our IT services division just earlier this year. After, it took some organizational wrangling to figure out where we wanted this to go and where was the most appropriate place. And as I said, we are doing our best to emulate the Cal State Chico model. We had an existing video captioning team in our libraries that was pulled out of the libraries. It was joined with this new team, and they are now currently working to remediate inaccessible learning materials with faculty. It's our service model is not perfect yet. Right now, it basically works where we have a unified email address that we publicize with faculty. They write to that email address. They say, "Hey, I've got these materials." They either say they point they point our team to Canvas where they can get them, or here they are. Can you help me? The team goes and fixes them and sends them back. Right now, we have 2 grad students that are leading the way and 4 undergraduates so far, and we're slowly ramping up. And we're hoping by the end of this academic year, we'll have the same 2 grad students because they're signed up through this year, but we'll have 8 to 10 undergraduates working by the end of this year. And we're slowly also uh, 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 expanding our communication efforts to reach out to faculty to raise awareness of Ally and raise awareness of accessibility and raise awareness of the Digital Accessibility Center. I'm really pleased to report that we took a former member of our Disability Access Office. She was an accommodations coordinator, working with faculty and departments around the university to ensure that students with registered disabilities were able to get documents and learning materials accommodations. She was involved in all of this stuff. And this is what I mean about finding people who are really passionate. She's low vision and she's really high energy. And she was involved in all of these committees leading up to then. And so it was a perfect fit for her to move into this digital accessibility manager position that was recently created. And now she's working with an ITS team to stand up the Digital Accessibility Center, increase our focus on training and awareness and communication, just starting to build in some support for website and application accessibility. Although on the application one, we're really waiting for the auditor's findings before we proceed on that one because we want to be careful. And if you're curious, you can read more about, if I can find my document again. It doesn't, it wants to hide. There you go. So our National Disability for Student Success, which is led by our rock star faculty member, Stephanie Coughlin. She's in educational psychology here at UT Austin. Her group recently published a sort of a summary of what we did and why we did it and how we did it, because this is, and it really emphasizes how, we weren't, I'm not obviously the university president or provost or anything. I'm a director sort of in the middle of the organization. My main partner in this has been Mario Guerra, who is a director as well in our IT services. We were really the prime movers behind getting this done. So how do you lead this from the middle of the organization? How do you convince leaders to come along and provide resources? How do you do this in a way and build structures that are sustainable so there's a path for accessibility in the long term? That's really what that document focuses on. Like I said, we're really proud of what we've been able to accomplish in a reasonably short period of time, although we do have lots more work to do. But you can read more about it there. So, building a culture and getting into compliance. So the first thing on the building a culture, I would really say is you just have to start talking about it more. So now, and again, I'm an advocate for this, but it's really been eye-opening for me that every single time I give a public presentation, we do a training for people about assessment or accreditation or any of the other stuff that I do. If it's any sort of public document that I share, I tell them this document was made accessible. Here's where you can get to it. Here's how I made it accessible. Microsoft Office has really great tools that are embedded that can help you make your things accessible. Do that. If you're going to be sharing things, make them accessible. And by just doing that thing at the beginning of every presentation I do, even when it has nothing to do with digital accessibility, I have so many people come to me and ask questions. And this is what I said about people being warm and welcoming of this. They come to me afterwards or they send me emails. They said, Jeff, can you tell me more or can we chat for a second? So I have people that come to me and ask, how can I get involved in this? And I really just say, if you're making something in Microsoft Word, open the accessibility checker. Make sure you've got headings, make sure you've got title, make sure you've designated a language and all that stuff that are important for accessibility. And it's actually not that hard if you're doing it from the get-go. So I just think starting having those conversations is a really important first step. Getting people more aware of and attuned to accessibility are really critical. With regard to the regulations themselves, they set a pretty high standard in a relatively short timeline. Now, I've worked in compliance for a long time. I am not, I think they're probably expecting too much too quickly, the Justice Department. And I am not a Justice Department auditor, but I strongly suspect when we get to 2026 or 2027, they're going to find that a lot of institutions are not meeting expectations yet. So and personally, having done this assessment and tried to set out a path and a timeline for us to be able to get up to speed on this stuff, I just don't know how we're going to be able to get fully up to speed on these regulations by 2026 because we are a large institution. So we have 2 years to do so. I think it's a little bit easier on websites because we have existing structures in place. I think we'll kind of be able to get mostly close to that through learning materials accessibility. But for applications, man, that's a really tough one because that's complex work. And in some cases, we have to radically redesign some of our systems that we probably should anyways, but that's time consuming, expensive, and difficult. So my advice in this regard is based a little bit on the notion that I don't think a lot of institutions are going to be able to be fully compliant with these regulations in 2026 or 27. But what I would strongly recommend is that when we get to 26 or 27 and your institution is on the firing line for being compliant with these regulations, that you at least have a plan in place. If you have a plan in place that gives you some compliance cover, that you probably won't get in trouble. And like I said, if as I suspect, there's a lot of institutions in this boat in 26 and 27, that's probably going to be enough for you to be able to slide by the regulators at that time. Maybe not forever. So how do you do that? Well, I would say start with, and what we did at UT was create a big tent, bring in as many possible people as possible to start having these conversations. ADA staff, that one's pretty obvious because they should be involved from the get-go, but also folks in the libraries, you have to have IT staff, faculty and students, staff members that deal with this type of thing and work in departments, central staff, people like me. In our first few meetings, we asked repeatedly, is there anybody else that needs to be here? And if they aren't, how do we get them here? And we added people. I would say over our first 3 to 4 months, we consistently added 1 or 2 people every time to the point where we got to that point. We had a committee of about, I think it was 12 to 15, 16 ended up being there. And it was a lot of people that were involved in this and were very interested in it, and everybody contributed something to the overall effort. So having all of those people involved in the room is really important. Assess your campus infrastructure. Like I said, we went in and got data from Ally. We got data from Moncito, the website scanner. We talked to developers. I'm going to I told you how we surveyed everybody. We did all that fairly systematically. We did focus groups of faculty. We talked to people in the departments. We just talked to a lot of people, collected it, brought it together to try to get an idea of where the awareness was on campus, where we could make improvements. And frankly, the most pressing concerns, and that's one of the things you'll see in the regulations, is you want to identify the most difficult problems you have. And those are the ones you're not going to be able to fix overnight, but those are the ones you need a plan for remediating over time. And then the most easily solvable problems. This is one. And look, I know and I've heard this from people like our institution can't afford Ally. Turning on Ally just by itself was a huge first step for us as a campus because it immediately raised awareness of accessibility in amongst our faculty. They saw the icons, even if they were, bothered by them because they're all red. They were there and they provided an opportunity to just start a conversation around learning materials accessibility. And that right there was just a first step because now we do have people that are working very actively. We have faculty members, we have staff members and designers and TAs who are working diligently in a lot of different courses to improve their learning materials accessibility. So that was a really, and it did cost money, but just by adopting it, it was a huge first step in moving forward. And so it's not quite the most easily solvable problem, but it was one thing we could do that would really be a game changer in terms of accessibility in one really important area. And lastly, as I said, create and implement a plan to update policies, establish timelines and accountability measures across all fields of concern here. I think this is critical. You have to have everybody at the table. Your compliance office needs to be involved. Legal probably needs to be involved. Obviously, your ADA people, but you have to put a plan in place. Because I don't think there's any way a lot of us are going to be able to our institutions are going to be able to be compliant with these rules in such a short time frame. But you give your institution a lot of cover if you have a good, well-developed plan. I think there is time to develop new policies. We are on a timeline to develop policies at UT Austin, although that process is very slow. But getting a policy put in place that deals with things like procurement, that deals with sort of the larger expectations, what exceptions there might be. Again, I would encourage you to check out the analysis that I gave you, the AI analysis of various digital accessibility policies. It was really useful for pointing out where there were gaps in our own digital accessibility policies. But that's really a great start. And if you have those things in place, I think you'll be complying with the spirit of the new regulations, and it'll give your campus time to develop these things sustainably. Because again, accessibility can be overwhelming. It can be really difficult for people. They don't know where to start. If a faculty member opens their LMS course and they see a million red ally icons, and it's easy for them to just see past them and move on. And we really want to provide space for this to happen in a way that's constructive and in the end going to be a positive change. So other considerations that I think are important to this. Accessibility is the law, but it's important to emphasize that it benefits everyone. Especially, I think that's important in the state of Texas these days. But accessibility is really something that benefits all students, and getting that messaging out is a big factor in, especially for faculty perceptions around accessibility and disability accommodations and things of that nature. But really, it's about the student experience and making learning more accessible for everyone. And that is a message that does resonate pretty regularly that we see. And so it's really to use that in your messaging. We've also had a pretty vibrant community of practice evolve from the big tent approach. We don't meet nearly as often as we were when we're putting all these things together, but by having these committees over several years, now we get together about once a semester and we talk through, what are we dealing with and what's happening and what are the updates. The ADA office gives us the latest skinny on whatever's happening in the legal landscape, and it enables us to talk about these things and keep the conversation going. And that's really important for, again, continuing to raise awareness, increase education, and provide opportunities for improvement in this space. Again, the costs. And again, I'm not 100% sure how this is going to shake out nationally, but I'll give you an example. When we were before we adopted Ally, the powers that be were like, well, what would it cost to hire a company to come in and fix all our documents for us? And the most reasonable quote we got from a vendor was basically $1 per page for everything that you have. And that is for a basic document, $1 per page. That's not factoring in foreign languages. That's not factoring in mathematical equations. That's not factoring in our arts, our College of Fine Arts. We have a lot of classes with a lot of images that need alt text. Those are much more complicated and require more work. But just to give you a sense of $1 per page, UT Austin every semester has 500,000 documents loaded in our Canvas LMS. And about 80, when we started, about 80% of those were at least moderately inaccessible. So you can imagine how those cost, and that's not even factoring how many pages are in those documents. That's just a straight count of documents. So that quickly became obvious that that was going to be completely untenable for sustainability's sake. And like I said, when it comes to expertise, there's just not a lot of people around the country who have this kind of expertise, and they are in high demand right now. And so you either got to develop it on your own, and that's actually one of the things we really like about the Cal State model is that you build a bench of people. You have students that are coming in and working, and that's one of the things they told us is that they've had people who were students, they get their bachelor's degree, but they get a job with the university and they go and work in other departments and areas at the university, and they take that accessibility knowledge with them. And so building a bench of people who have accessibility knowledge and expertise within your organization is a much smarter and I think more sustainable way to develop this work over time, although it has the disadvantage of taking time for that to occur. And so you got to be prepared for this. I don't have great answers here because I don't control what vendors charge for their services. But if you go do a search for accessibility jobs, accessibility developer jobs, and that thing around the country, you'll find quite a few of them. And the pay rates for them are fairly high because it's a highly specialized skill set, especially for software and application developers. So just be prepared for that. And lastly, and this is the one, the most daunting to me, I'm also our university's HB 2504 coordinator for folks who aren't in Texas. That's a state law that requires that every public institution post undergraduate syllabi in a public database for that's accessible for everyone. This does fall under the new regulations. We have 11,000 syllabi that we post every semester, and very few of them are accessible. This is going to be a huge challenge for us in getting these kinds of documents up to speed. Once I realized this one, I was one that worried me the most. We adopted simple syllabus as well. Lori, I see your comment, and that's helping. But not all of our faculty members want to adopt simple syllabus, and we can't make all of our faculty adopt simple syllabus because, well, we're at UT Austin and we can't make our faculty do much. Sorry, I know I'm being recorded, but our faculty are strong here and they resist that sort of thing. So we suggest that they use simple syllabus. We strongly encourage them to use simple syllabus because it does configure for accessibility. But that is a challenge we're facing and puts us in some compliance risk. So I'm going to stop my share at this point. That is my presentation. And I wanted to leave any time for any questions folks might have. I think we go till 12:15. Is that right, Ken?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. So I see a lot of vocal stuff in the chat. I see y'all are chatting with each other and everything. That's great. But I don't want to spend time reading the chat. But if y'all have any questions, I'm happy to answer them right now.
And I do have it set where you should be able to unmute if you want to ask Jeff a question. I'm looking for hand raises in case anybody's doing that.
Yeah, we emphasize, I'm just looking at the chat. We do emphasize a lot to our faculty. Like it's okay. You don't have to do it all at once. Some of them still get nervous. Um, that's really inevitable. They don't like seeing the red icons in there, but
It looks like someone just asked a question if this was study and all was just UT Austin, or is it the whole UT system?
This is just UT Austin. UT system is very fragmented in that regard. There's not a lot of things that happen across the system, but this is a case where we just are looking at UT Austin.
Oh, it looks like someone else asked about resharing the AI scan because they missed the link.
Yep. So
Is
I'll put in the digital accessibility policy scan that we did. There it is, and it was AI constructed. It's a perfect use of AI because it was all public information, and it was a quick summary I was able to generate for our committee. Here is a link to an accessible version of this presentation as well. If you'd like to download this presentation, you can go check it out. You'll notice I kept it simple. I didn't put a lot of images and stuff in the presentation. Um, and that helps keep things more accessible in a PowerPoint document, but you can go download that there. And there was one other resource, which is the National Disability Center for Student Success, which is at UT Austin. It's just past its year old. They did a profile of this effort here at UT Austin. You can go check it out. How did we learn we were under GAJ audit? They told us. The Department of Justice went to our legal affairs and said, "You're under audit. We'd like to meet with you." And we had been under audit at that point for about 6 months. And people are like, "Jeff, why are you telling everybody we're under audit?" I'm like, everybody's going to get audited
yeah.
at one time or another. It's not really that you're in trouble. It's just that they're checking to make sure you're following the law. So that's why I always respond to that. I'm like, we're UT Austin, we're gonna get audited. The reason, honestly, and I don't know this for a fact, I think Harvard University was one of the first to update their digital accessibility policy because frankly, they probably got audited first because they're Harvard. So yeah, it was just that the auditors told us and they brought us into a meeting and we talked to them. Ended up meeting with them 3 times to talk about various aspects of this. And it was revealing. The big thing I took away was adopting allies not enough. It's more about what are you putting in place to move just beyond that. They were pleased that we had done that, but it was clear that they were expecting more.
I'm curious how you involved students in that big tent approach. How did you get student participation? I know that UT has very active faculty and student government, but I
Yep.
wasn't sure if that was your only outlet or what other
It,
avenues
w-
you might have
it was a
used.
mix. We got a representative from student government, and we had our disability and access office identify a student with a disability who is interested in serving on the committee. So we kind of student government was interested, and then disability and access sent us a student with a disability who wanted to participate as well. And again, it's one of the things that's really great about this is those students are really passionate about this work. It's really um, contagious. It really brings a lot of energy to the work. Well, again, that's all I have for a presentation. I'm happy to hang around and answer any other questions folks might have. Please feel free. But that aside, if y'all, oh, thank y'all.
All
And
right.
you can always email me as well. I'll put my email in the chat if you're curious. I didn't put it in the presentation. I should have. And I'm happy to talk about this. As I said, this stuff, I'm passionate about it. It's important to me personally. So if you have any questions or want any more information, please feel free to email me and I'd be happy to chat or send you resources that we have.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I saw your email and it just zipped right on by. So a lot of chats going on. Before everyone takes off, because I think some folks might start jumping out. I want to remind all of you that we do have a discussion board on the conference website. Keep on OER talking Texas and beyond if you want to continue the conversation there. And I'm going to go ahead and stop recording at this point.